First and foremost, thank you so much for sitting down with us. We can only begin to imagine how busy the last few days have been. For those of you joining us, our co-CEO, Sandhya, Jennifer, and Jessica's first day taking the helm of Common Future was June 15th, and we are recording this very shortly after. How have the last few days been? What would you like to say to our friends and listeners hearing from you today?
Yeah, well, first, thank you so much for the invitation and opportunity, and to our listeners and community, welcome. It's really been great. It's just over a week into week 2, and so far we've just been feeling really held, really well supported by our staff, by the community at large, a lot of positive sentiment. And it's just been a boost of confidence and just made it feel like a really good transition. I'm really excited to deeply partner with my fellow co-CEOs. And, we've already started working together with our different processes to promote and advance our different conversations. So that has felt really good. And we certainly have our work cut out. I'm eager to continue advancing our mission and vision. We know these have been very challenging times, from the pandemic, the racial justice reckoning after George Floyd and others' murders, and the financial squeeze many have been feeling in the face of inflation and supply chain issues. We've got today a decision on affirmative action being banned. So just a lot of things that are happening, and that really underscore the importance of us continuing our work and pressing forward to ensure we have an economy that works for all.
In this transition, as you switch from looking internally as a CEO to this now outward, even global view as co-CEO, what have been the biggest changes for you?
Yeah, I think really the biggest change is just transitioning from being very internally focused to an opportunity that's very much externally focused. When I started my journey at Common Future, I was really excited to be internally focused. It was at a time where the organization was going to be growing significantly, and it was really critical to establish the systems and tools needed for strong operational and financial infrastructure, and to really codify and strengthen our people practices. And it's been such amazing work, and I'm excited now to transition those things that I held to others, and to see even more opportunity for their leadership to emerge.
Speaking of your journey, we'd love if you could share more about that journey that took you here. Can you share a little bit about your background and how that's led to your current role as co-CEO?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm going to take you back just a little bit. I am originally from Oakland, California, East Oakland specifically, and I come from a working class family and grew up in a community that faced and still faces some pretty pressing challenges, economic, health, educational, the variety, right, that we see a number of communities impacted by. And I also grew up in a community that had many assets, and I grew up being encouraged and knowing just the role and importance of education. And so I had opportunities to explore. And during that time, I really thought that the way that I wanted to impart change in my community and communities like mine was through the law. And so I went to law school. I became a lawyer. I began my career at one of the largest corporate law firms, Skadden Arps. But I ultimately knew that I wanted to transition into public interest work to keep working on addressing many of the challenges that I was very familiar with, that were very personal to me. And so I began my public interest career at a nonprofit called New York Lawyers for the Public Interest as a health justice staff attorney. And we worked with many community-based organizations. And access to healthcare in communities that had been historically excluded. And from there, I transitioned into an organization that applied a consulting model to partner with large education, school districts, and state education agencies to support them in implementing their reform initiatives and advancing equity for the students that were part of their schools. From there, I transitioned into a large social service agency, one of the largest in Brooklyn, New York. That organization worked on a variety of the many issues that impact communities today, providing youth services, family services, mental health services. And from there, I took some time off. I had my first son. And then it was after that I joined Common Future, excited to really apply the lessons that I had learned across the several organizations where I had previously worked and think about how the operational infrastructure could really help or hinder advancing the mission and the vision. And now here I am, having done that work at Common Future, and excited to think about the broader environment, both our internal environment, but also the external that impacts the internal and that symbiotic relationships.
When you first took the helm as co-lead, you spoke about how Common Future continues to pilot and support field-defining initiatives that bring about economic justice, and how proud you are of helping set a standard for how organizations can effectively partner with BIPOC communities. What does that mean in practice? What are you hoping to dig into as you take the helm in this new role?
One of the things Common Future does really well is just really bring an intentionality to how we work with broader stakeholders, but also the folks that we bring onto our team. Many of our folks have direct lived experience and, the challenges that we're working to address in advancing racial and economic equity. So with that comes an acute understanding and awareness and this experience of being closest to the problems and therefore, being closest to the solutions. And so I think because of that, it means we approach our partnerships differently. We seek out co-creation. We don't seek to impose. We take the direction and leadership from our network and from those stakeholders as we design and implement different pilots and models, or uplift different models that are working to advance economic equity across our country. And so I think that is really special.
Having implemented so many visionary practices at Common Future, what do you see as the future of work in 2023? What trends do you think our industry will have to fight against? And what, if any, are the implications for the work we do to promote racial and economic equity?
I think the 4-day work week for sure is a topic that continues to dominate conversations. Organizations have been thinking about different ways to continue promoting flexibility, whether through hybrid models, being fully remote, and with time, something that we're seeing across industries. It's been really exciting to apply that to Common Future and, think about what that looks like in the nonprofit sector, a sector that employs many women and people from BIPOC communities, LGBTQ plus communities, and just what that means for these different communities. So the other thing is just how we better support working parents, moms, and pregnant women in particular. And so just yesterday, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act went into effect. And so just continuing to think about what that critical support looks like, especially in industries and organizations that have not been able to provide those things or have not provided those things. I do think there are a few troubling trends that we've seen. I think a big one is the backtracking on DEI commitments, those commitments that were so prevalent in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd and the resulting racial justice reckoning. Organizations are finding that, unlike other projects that maybe have a couple year, timeline or horizon, this is one of those that's an ongoing journey. And so it's hard. It's not, easy work. There's discomfort in it. And, we've seen with a number of the layoffs that have happened, those DEI DEI positions that were hired for were some of the first to be let go. And, just today I mentioned even the Supreme Court ruling banning affirmative action. And, in universities, the states that have been banning books and banning DEI committees and trainings and all of these things that really help promote, the society that is equitable, inclusive, and fosters belonging. Those things are under attack, and they represent the backlash that we see when there is that kind of progress. So that is troubling, and it's an invitation for not just our organization, Common Future, but other organizations to double down on the commitments and press forward.
Can you describe a moment in your Common Future tenure where you were most inspired by the work we do?
There have been a few, but I'll pick one. I think one was when we completed our compensation audit and compensation philosophy. For me, it represented, a real meeting, between the external work that we do and how we think about and employ it internally with staff who do have lived experience and are impacted by the same issues that we speak to and address. That work is ongoing. It's not a one-time kind of initiative. It requires ongoing work to make sure that, we're reviewing data and promoting equity with respect to compensation and that philosophy. But, it was that opportunity that we had to be intentional and to suspend disbelief and even pose the question and think about, what does it look like to build wealth with our staff, right? Like that's not even something you ever hear talked about in certainly in the nonprofit sector when it comes to those kinds of policies. And so even just having the space to imagine what if, and not just what if, but how do we start to take the steps, even if they're not conclusive today and it's ongoing work, how do we still start and make that a part of our ethos? And so having that opportunity to level up was just really critical for our organization and for our work and how we demonstrate what we are working towards externally.
Can you name some folks and organizations that you look to for inspiration?
Yes, absolutely. There are a few. One that immediately comes to mind is Brian Stevenson, the CEO of the Equal Justice Initiative based in Alabama, promoting racial justice in our criminal system and, just looking at our history and the need for repair and restoration given, the dark past that we've had in this country. He was also one of my professors in law school. I participated in his clinic and spent a couple months in Alabama working on one of the cases that Equal Justice Initiative had at the time. And I think what's so impressive about Brian is just this isn't just work for him, it's a calling. That's one example. Another example is Adam Grant, a professor at Wharton, one of the great organizational psychologists of our time, who regularly talks about work and the future of work. And given the work that we do at Common Future, I'm regularly listening to the podcast and just learning from the insights that he shares in conversations with other leaders and from a variety of industries and sectors. So, and another fun fact, he was also someone that I worked with when I was an undergraduate student at the University of Michigan, and he was a graduate student. And so it's been amazing to stay abreast of the things that both he and Brian are doing, just given, the way in which our paths have crossed. I think in addition to that, people like Nicole Hannah-Jones, Stacey Abrams, women that have done critical work to advance our democracy, to advance the narratives about our democracy, and that have also faced significant backlash and attacks, and have just had so much courage in the face of that to not just withstand, but to continue doing what they know is right and what they know is needed for our country. And so I admire them. I look up to them and also follow their work. In addition to that, my family is a great inspiration. My mother, in particular, she's probably where I got my initial interest in equity and justice. I remember when I was 6 years old, she took me to the Oakland Coliseum to see Nelson Mandela when he was first freed from prison after having served so many years during the apartheid regime. And it, clearly has had a lasting effect on me and my trajectory. And I'm just inspired by my husband, my two sons. They're 3 and 20 months old, and they encourage and inspire me every day to do the work that I do for my families.
Can you describe your vision for an equitable common future?
I think it's simple. Feels like a lot to ask at times, but I think the core principles are simple. My vision is one where everyone thrives and has the conditions, the resources, the opportunities needed, and are not hindered by race or class or other elements of identity. And so, that's my big picture vision. That's what I think about. And, it requires both looking at the past, understanding the past, fighting the injustices, but also the space and opportunity to imagine the future that hasn't necessarily existed. And so I'm excited about that opportunity with Common Future. That's precisely what we do in our work.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Jennifer.